I have a sign that's right behind my desk. It's been there for forever. It's a quote from Don Helder Camara, who was the Archbishop of my mind is blank. My mind just went blank. I think São Paulo in Brazil. And it says, when I give food to the hungry, they call me a saint. When I ask why there are hungry people, they call me a communist. I like that quote a lot. It says a lot. Who are we? How do we measure up? What's the measuring stone for how we're doing in the world? Our first reading today on the third Sunday of Lent comes from the Hebrew Scriptures. It talks about those things that most people would, I suspect, know by heart, the Ten Commandments. I'm not sure if people still know them by heart now, but we used to have to memorize those before. Lots of controversy over those. There's lots of folks who would have you hang those up on every schoolroom and every courtroom in the land, and there's battles about that. Not here to get into those battles, but I asked a rabbi once, a friend of mine, what she thought of that controversy about putting the Ten Commandments up in public places. She had a very interesting answer. She said, the Ten Commandments belong to us. She said, we're the ones who are obligated to them. She goes, they're not yours at all. She says, but we appreciate the publicity, which I thought was a good answer. And she added that along with those come 613 other rules and regulations that are part of the Torah that all who follow those are obligated to follow. And she said she hasn't met anybody yet who follows all of them. For example, does anyone here like shrimp? Okay, well, big trouble. You'd be executed by sunset if you got caught doing that. So anyway, she made the point, though, that is something that's kind of unique to the people of Israel. It wasn't meant for others. She goes, we can trace our covenant, our original covenant, it's back to Abraham, which we both share. It's our relationship with God that is fundamental. Not just our relationship with God, but as a result of that, how we relate to one another, how we live that out in the world. That seems to make all the difference in the world. This bishop of San Pablo got into lots of trouble for living it out in the world. Surprisingly, he didn't get into too much trouble with the state authorities. He did get into lots of trouble with the church authorities. Every 5 years, a bishop has to go to Rome to give an accounting of his diocese and how it's doing and its goals and challenges and whatnot. And when he went back in the late 70s, early 80s for his 5-year visit, it's called an ad lumina visit every 5 years, the authorities in Rome, the Vatican authorities, chastised him for not wearing his clerical garments out in public. They asked him why he didn't wear them out, but they told him if he wore them out, it would be a great sign for people to see that he was a priest and a bishop. He had a great response for them. He said, if it takes wearing a religious garb for people to know that I'm a priest or a bishop, I must be doing a pretty lousy job at being a priest or a bishop, you know? And again, he was focusing on the deeds, on his actions, not on the words. It's so easy to say words, it's an entirely different thing to live out the words. It said many people came to believe in Jesus after today's gospel because they saw the signs he was doing. Signs he was doing, not the words that he was saying. His words come easy. If you notice in today's gospel, it's the authorities that are after Jesus, not the state authorities. These aren't Roman emperors who are after him. It's his own people who are after him. It's the leaders of the church and synagogue. Because they were saying all of the right words, but they turned the whole enterprise of faith into an economic system where they were sacrificing all sorts of things for a high profit. Doves and sheep and oxen came at a pretty steep price. And because they were religiously oriented, they had to be pure, which cost twice as much. That's what brought Jesus in to say, you're saying all the right things, but this is not the way to live. I would encourage people after Mass, as you leave, there's a cross at the back of the church that has the corporal works of mercy hanging from it. That's what Jesus was talking about. Feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, sheltering the homeless. It's visiting the imprisoned. It's visiting the sick. It's offering healing and reconciliation all along those particular lines. It's one thing to say I'm a Catholic, but that doesn't really mean all that much. It's our behavior that people will ultimately understand us by. If somebody were to ask you what your religion was, I think the only place it really happens now is when you enter a hospital. They ask you, it's on your admissions form, what religion you are. I think it's the only place. I think when you get jury duty, it's asked. I have it tomorrow. That's the only reason I remember that. You can check off a box. I wonder why hospitals ask it. I think that must be an insurance question, to cover all their bases in case they mess up. Who knows? But does checking off a box really do it? I wonder if somebody followed us around for a week or 2 or 3, and were just observing us, but not talking to you, not asking you any questions, just following you around the streets, your work, school, home, just observing your behavior. I wonder if that person was asked to check off a box at the end of it all, it's what they might check off for each one of us. I wonder if our behavior gives us away. We're about to baptize Camille to the Christian family. I wonder if 25, 30 years from now, if somebody asked her that question, I'm sure she could answer it. I wonder if that stranger who might be following her around might answer that question by her deeds, by what she does in the world, if they would know her. There's many nowadays who would check off none for that box. I think that's the second largest religious group in the country right now is none of the above. 40 years ago, that would have been kind of unthinkable. There's only very few. It's the fastest growing category. There are many who would say, it's very proudly, I'm a Christian, I'm a Jewish, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Hindu, I'm a Buddhist, whatever. But there are second to largest group is none of the above. I wonder what we might think if we watched their particular actions. Some of the ones who check it off, though, maybe concern me more, like in Jesus' day. The box doesn't mean all that much. But Jesus drove them out of church. He never once asked people to go to a church or a synagogue. In today's gospel, he drives folk out. I take preaching kind of seriously, and I always think I do a pretty horrible job at it. And I was reading a book recently about kind of geared toward preaching, the discipline and the art of preaching. And the person who wrote it said something very interesting. He said, oftentimes if a person is preaching well, he says they'll get into a lot of controversy. He goes, sometimes a person will kind of confront them afterwards very angrily and say, I can't believe you said that. I'm going to leave this church and not going to contribute anymore. And he goes, the person who hears those words, they usually have one of 2 options. One is to say, let's have lunch this week and talk about it, kind of work things out. The other is just to say, I'm going to miss you, He opts for the second approach. He thinks that one thing that does great harm to a community is to have folks who say that they're a part of the mission when they're really not. When their words are there, but their deeds are elsewhere. When the words that they say or the box that they check off might be what you want to hear, but when their lives are really not about that endeavor. Thinks that can do a lot more harm than good. So maybe just to question this third Sunday of Lent as we journey our way through Lent going towards Easter. How is your Lent going? If somebody were following you from a distance these past 3 weeks, and if that person were asked what faith you belong to, what faith community that they might suspect you belong to, what would that person say?